My name is Clara and I'm 32 years old. For the last 10 years, my life has been a quiet exercise in responsibility in putting everyone else first. My parents, Mark and Susan, always said I was the sensible one, which was their code for boring and predictable. They looked at my life as a landscape architect, a career I loved and had built from scratch, and saw only a modest, unexciting income. When I told them my dream was to one day buy a small house with a garden, they laughed. Not a mean laugh, just a dismissive, patronizing little chuckle that said, "Oh, that's cute, but let's be realistic." They told me I'd never be able to afford a house in this market, that I should just focus on helping out the family. So I did. But what they didn't know was that my grandmother, the only person who ever truly saw me, had left me a secret, a weapon. Last week, I invited them to a meeting at a realtor's office, a meeting they thought was to finally dash my foolish dreams. They sat there smug and confident as the realtor slid a folder across the table toward them. They thought it contained market analyses showing how impossible my dream was. But when they opened it, they weren't looking at spreadsheets. They were looking at the deeds to not one but two properties, both fully paid for, both in my name. If you've ever been underestimated by the very people who should have been your biggest cheerleaders, then drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And before I tell you how this life-changing moment came to be, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, because this is a story about how the quietest people can make the loudest statements. Before that fateful meeting at the realtor's office, my life was defined by a quiet, predictable rhythm of responsibility. I worked as a landscape architect for a boutique firm in Denver, a job that didn't pay a fortune but filled me with a deep sense of purpose. I loved the process of transforming a neglected patch of earth into a living, breathing space of beauty and tranquility. My apartment was small, a one-bedroom rental with a tiny balcony where I crammed as many potted plants as I could fit. It was my own little sanctuary, but it was never truly home. Home was a dream, a vision of a small craftsman house with a wraparound porch and a yard big enough for a real garden, a place where I could put down roots both literally and figuratively. This dream was my own quiet rebellion against the role I played in my family. To my parents, Mark and Susan, and my younger brother, Leo, I was not Clara the creative professional. I was Clara the safety net, the reliable one, the backup plan. This wasn't a new dynamic. It was the foundation upon which our family was built. My father, Mark, was a retired history teacher who believed in practicality above all else. My mother, Susan, was a part-time administrator whose primary focus in life was ensuring the comfort and success of her golden child, my brother Leo. Leo was 2 years younger than me, and from the moment he was born, the sun in our family solar system had shifted its position to orbit around him. He was charming, impulsive, and blessed with the kind of effortless confidence that made people forgive his many, many mistakes. While I was meticulously saving my allowance for a used car in high school, my parents bought Leo a brand new convertible for his 16th birthday. When I worked 2 jobs to pay my way through state college for my degree, they drained their savings to send Leo to a private art school from which he dropped out after 3 semesters to find himself. The pattern was set early and never wavered. My achievements were met with a polite nod. Leo's slightest whims were celebrated as signs of burgeoning genius. I was the sturdy, dependable oak tree in the background. He was the flashy, unpredictable lightning storm that demanded everyone's attention. And like a dependable tree, I was expected to provide shelter. The financial support started small. In my early 20s, it was, "Can you spot Leo $100 for his car insurance? We're a little short this month." Or, "Clara, honey, the phone bill is a bit high because of Leo's data usage. Could you help us out?" I always did. I loved my family, and I told myself this is what families do. They help each other. But help soon became expectation. A few years ago, I had finally saved up $5,000, a huge accomplishment for me. I had a vision of using it for a down payment on a better car as my old sedan was starting to show its age. I made the mistake of mentioning this at Sunday dinner. 2 days later, I got a frantic call from my mother. Leo had been in a minor accident, his fault of course, and had damaged someone else's property. He was uninsured for that kind of liability. The other party is threatening to sue my mother, said her voice laced with panic. We need $5,000 to make this go away, Clara. You're the only one who can help. When I hesitated just for a second, my father got on the line. Don't be selfish, Clara. This is your brother's future. That car of yours can last another year. The guilt was a physical weight. I transferred the money. My savings account went back to zero. Leo never thanked me. My parents said I did the right thing as if it were my duty. 2 weeks later, Leo posted pictures on social media from a ski trip to Aspen with his friends. That incident should have been a wake-up call, but the sense of obligation was woven so deeply into my being that I couldn't see it clearly. I was the family's silent investor, and the return on my investment was the continued fragile piece of our family dynamic. When I finally landed my first big project after starting my firm a contract to design the gardens for a new luxury hotel, I was ecstatic. It was a huge step for my career and came with a significant bonus. I thought finally they'll see me. They'll be proud. I invited them out to a nice restaurant to celebrate. For the first 20 minutes, they seemed happy for me. But then the conversation inevitably shifted. That bonus sounds wonderful, honey, my mother said, stirring her iced tea. You know Leo's been talking about getting a new laptop for his graphic design projects. The good ones are so expensive. My father chimed in. And the property taxes are due next month. It's always a struggle on our fixed income. By the end of the meal, my celebration had turned into a financial planning session for their needs. A significant portion of my hard-earned bonus was allocated before the check even arrived. I paid for dinner, smiled, and felt a familiar hollow ache in my chest. This was my life. I was a supporting character in their story. My dreams, my desires, my financial security, they were all secondary to the needs of my parents and the whims of my brother. So the dream of a house became my secret. It was the one thing that was entirely mine, a private hope I nurtured in the quiet hours after long days of work. I started a separate hidden savings account. I took on freelance projects on weekends, designing small residential gardens for extra cash. Every dollar I saved felt like a small act of defiance. It was a slow, arduous process. The housing market in Denver was brutal, and sometimes looking at the paltry sum in my secret account versus the astronomical property prices, I felt my parents' dismissive laughter echoing in my ears. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was a foolish dream. But it was the only thing that kept me going, the thought that one day I would have a key to a door that was only mine, a garden where I could plant things and watch them grow beholden to no one. I thought that saving money was my only path forward, but I had no idea that a letter written years ago by the one person who understood was about to change the entire game. The event that set everything in motion wasn't a sudden windfall or a tragic loss, but something I had worked tirelessly to achieve. After years of building my reputation, I was promoted to senior landscape architect at my firm. The promotion itself was a validation of my skills and dedication, but it was the accompanying salary increase and a substantial performance bonus of $20,000 that felt truly life-altering. For the first time, my secret dream didn't feel so distant. As I stared at the numbers in my bank account, I did the math over and over. Combined with my hidden savings, this bonus pushed me over a critical threshold. I wasn't just dreaming anymore. I could actually start looking. I could make a real down payment. My initial reaction was a surge of pure, unadulterated joy. I walked home from work that day feeling like I was floating. I pictured it all, browsing listings online, visiting open houses on weekends, the thrill of finding the one. In my excitement, I made a calculated error. I decided to share the news of my promotion with my family. A part of me, the part that never stopped yearning for their approval, thought that maybe this time would be different. This wasn't just a bonus. It was a career milestone, a promotion, a new title. Surely they would have to acknowledge this achievement on its own merits. I called them that evening, my voice buzzing with an energy they rarely heard from me. Mom, Dad, I have some amazing news. I got promoted to senior architect. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Oh, that's nice, dear, my mother said, her tone polite but lacking any real warmth. Does that mean you'll be working even longer hours? My father was more direct. What's the pay bump look like? Is it significant? The conversation quickly devolved into their usual pattern. They were less interested in what the promotion meant for my career and more interested in what it meant for my wallet and, by extension, what it meant for them. Well, a little extra income will certainly be a relief for you, my mother commented. Maybe now you won't have to be so stressed about money all the time. The implication, as always, was that my careful budgeting and frugal lifestyle were signs of struggle, not disciplined saving. The true nature of their reaction, however, didn't reveal itself until a few days later. I mentioned, perhaps foolishly, that with the bonus I was finally going to start seriously looking at buying a small house. The reaction was instantaneous and unanimous laughter. It was that same soft, dismissive chuckle I knew so well, the one that felt like a pat on the head to a naive child. "Oh, Clara," my father said, his voice laced with amusement. "Don't get ahead of yourself. $20,000 is a nice little cushion, but it's a drop in the bucket in this housing market. You have no idea what you're getting into," my mother added. "He's right, honey. It's a lovely thought, but you're just not in a position to be a homeowner. It's a huge responsibility. Property taxes, maintenance insurance. It would swallow you whole. You should use that money to help Leo get a more reliable car. His is on its last legs." Even Leo, who was visiting for dinner, chimed in. "Yeah, sis, a house. That's a major league move. You're more of a minor league player, you know, no offense." Their reaction was the catalyst. It wasn't just dismissive. It was a concerted effort to extinguish my dream before it could even begin to smolder. They didn't see my success as my own. They saw it as a new resource for the family fund, and my personal ambition as a threat to that resource. The joy I had felt just days before curdled into a cold, hard resolve. They thought it was impossible. They thought I couldn't do it. Fine. I wouldn't just prove them wrong. I would do it without them even knowing. Their disbelief wasn't a deterrent anymore. It was fuel. That night, instead of just browsing listings, I contacted a realtor, a woman named Sarah Jenkins, whose ad I'd seen in a local magazine. The storm had been brewing for years, but their laughter was the change in pressure that signaled the hurricane was about to make landfall. And I realized I had been preparing for this storm my whole life. My journey into the world of house hunting began as a clandestine operation. I took calls from my realtor Sarah during my lunch breaks, huddled in my car for privacy. I scheduled viewings for weekday afternoons when I knew my family assumed I was at work. It was exhilarating and nerve-wracking, a double life, where I was both the responsible daughter and a secret revolutionary plotting her independence. Sarah was a godsend. She was sharp, empathetic, and quickly picked up on the fact that I was navigating a sensitive family situation without my needing to spell it out. The first sign of true escalation came about 2 weeks into my search. My mother called me one afternoon. "Clara, honey, your father and I were just talking. We know you have this little idea about buying a house, and we think it's sweet, but we're worried you're being taken advantage of by some predatory realtor. Why don't you give us her name? We can talk to her, make sure she understands your financial limitations." My blood ran cold. The request was cloaked in concern, but it was a power play, plain and simple. They wanted to control the narrative, to insert themselves into my one private endeavor and manage it for me. I politely declined. "That's okay, Mom. Sarah's great. I have it under control." My refusal was met with a sigh of deep disappointment, as if I were a rebellious teenager. "Well, don't say we didn't warn you when you end up in over your head." The second incident was more direct and far more humiliating. Leo's birthday was approaching, and my parents decided to throw a small family dinner. During the meal, my father, in what he probably considered a moment of light-hearted teasing, announced to the table, "Everyone, let's toast to Clara, our future real estate mogul. She's going to buy a mansion with that big promotion of hers." He winked at me and everyone chuckled. Leo snorted into his napkin. More like a shoebox, he muttered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. She should just give me the down payment. At least I'd turn it into a cool art studio instead of a place to grow boring flowers. Instead of defending me, my mother jumped in to support Leo. Now, Leo, be nice. Your sister is just exploring her options. It's good to have dreams, even if they're not realistic. Maybe one day when you're a famous artist, you can buy her a nice little guest cottage on your estate. They all laughed, a closed circle of amusement at my expense. I felt my face flush with a familiar mixture of anger and shame. I sat there silent, pushing food around my plate, feeling utterly invisible. They weren't just dismissing my dream, they were mocking it, turning it into a running joke, a testament to my perceived naivete. My attempt to have a calm, rational conversation later that evening was a spectacular failure. When I told my mother that their comments were hurtful, she waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, Clara, you're always so sensitive. We were just teasing. You need to learn to take a joke. Honestly, this obsession with a house is making you uptight." This was their go-to tactic, gaslighting. My valid feelings were invalidated, twisted into a character flaw. I wasn't hurt. I was too sensitive. I wasn't being disrespected. I was unable to take a joke. The third and most blatant incident involved the realtor directly. After weeks of searching, Sarah found a promising property, a small, slightly dated but well-maintained craftsman bungalow in a quiet neighborhood. It was at the very top of my budget, but it had a decent-sized yard, and the good bones I was looking for. I was scheduled to see it on a Saturday morning. The day before, my mother called. "Clara, I happened to be talking to my friend Carol, and she mentioned she knows a fantastic realtor. I gave her your number, and she said she'd be happy to give you a free consultation just to give you a second opinion." I knew immediately what was happening. This was an ambush. "Mom, I already have a realtor." "I'm happy with Sarah." "Don't be silly," she insisted. "This is a big decision. You need all the advice you can get. Her name is Brenda. Just talk to her." For me, against my better judgment, I agreed to a brief call. Brenda, the friend's realtor, spent 20 minutes talking down to me, questioning my budget, my job stability, and my understanding of the market. It was clear my mother had painted a picture of me as a financially clueless child. The final straw was when Brenda said, "Your mother mentioned you're looking at a property on Elm Street tomorrow. Honestly, from what I'm hearing about your situation, you'd be much better off continuing to rent and using your savings to help your family. It's the more responsible choice." She had told her about the specific property. My mother had gone behind my back and actively tried to sabotage my efforts. This wasn't concern. This was control. This was a deliberate attempt to keep me in my designated role as the family safety net. That night, I met my best friend, also named Sarah, for a drink. I hadn't told her the full extent of the situation, embarrassed by my own family's behavior. But after the incident with the rival realtor, I laid it all out. She listened intently, her expression growing more and more concerned. When I finished, she took a long sip of her wine and looked me straight in the eye. "Clara," she said, her voice firm but kind, "this isn't about a house anymore, is it? They're not afraid you can't afford a house. They're terrified that you can. Because if you have your own home, your own mortgage, your own life, you're no longer their emergency fund. You're no longer on call. A house isn't just a building to them. It's your declaration of independence, and it scares the hell out of them." Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. She was right. It wasn't about money or market prices. It was about my freedom, and they would do anything to prevent me from achieving it. Hearing it from an outside perspective, from someone who wasn't mired in our toxic dynamic, was the final validation I needed. I wasn't being sensitive. I wasn't being selfish. I was being systematically undermined. I walked out of that bar with a newfound clarity. The game had changed. This was no longer about proving I could buy a house. This was about reclaiming my life. I had just handed them the ammunition for their final, most devastating attack. The viewing for the Craftsman bungalow on Elm Street was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a sunny Saturday morning. I woke up with a knot of dread in my stomach, a feeling I couldn't shake despite the beautiful weather. The conversation with my friend Sarah had solidified my resolve, but it had also opened my eyes to the depth of my family's manipulation. I knew they wouldn't let this go easily. As I was getting ready to leave, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Clara, honey, good morning. Your father and I were just about to head out for some errands, and we realized we'd be right near Elm Street around 10. What a coincidence! We thought we'd just pop by and see this little house you're so excited about. And we're bringing Leo. He has a good eye for potential, you know." It wasn't a coincidence. It was a planned invasion. My private viewing, a moment I had been anxiously anticipating, was being hijacked. "Mom, I'd really rather do this on my own," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "Oh, don't be silly. We won't get in the way. We just want to support you," she chirped, the false sweetness in her voice making my teeth ache. "We're already in the car. See you in a bit." She hung up before I could protest further. I arrived a few minutes early, hoping to have a moment with my realtor, Sarah, before my family descended. Sarah saw the look on my face as I got out of the car. "Let me guess," she said with a knowing smile. "The cavalry is coming," I nodded grimly. "They think they're coming to support me." "Right," she said, rolling her eyes slightly. "Well, this is your viewing. I take my cues from you. If you want them to wait outside, just say the word." But I knew that would only cause a bigger scene. Just as Sarah was unlocking the front door, their oversized SUV pulled up, parking directly behind my modest sedan, effectively boxing me in. My parents and Leo piled out their expressions, a mixture of feigned enthusiasm and deep-seated skepticism. The next hour was excruciating. They followed me through every room, offering a running commentary of unsolicited negative opinions. "The kitchen is so dated. You'd have to gut it completely," my mother declared, running a finger over a perfectly clean countertop. "Look at these old windows. The heating bills in winter would be astronomical," my father announced, tapping on a pane of glass. Leo was the worst. He walked through the space with a theatrical swagger, pointing out flaws with relish. "The yard is smaller than it looked in the pictures. And this living room has a weird vibe. No flow. I wouldn't be able to get any creative work done in here." Every positive feature I pointed out, they countered with a negative. The beautiful hardwood floors, probably a nightmare to maintain. The quiet tree-lined street, no privacy from the neighbors. The charming built-in bookshelves, a waste of space. They weren't evaluating a house. They were systematically dismantling my dream piece by piece right in front of me. The final soul-crushing blow came as we were standing in the backyard. Sarah, my realtor, was trying her best to remain professional, pointing out the mature maple tree and the potential for a new patio. My father pulled her aside, speaking in a confidential tone that was loud enough for me to hear perfectly. "Look, Sarah," he said, putting a hand on her arm. "We know our daughter means well, but she's in way over her head. She doesn't have the financial discipline for this. We're actually here to do her a favor, to be the voice of reason." My mother joined in, nodding vigorously. "What we're thinking," she said, smiling at Sarah as if they were co-conspirators, "is that this house actually has wonderful potential for Leo." I froze. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "He's the creative one in the family," my mother continued, gesturing toward Leo, who was busy taking a selfie by the fence. "He could really turn this place into something special. We were thinking if the price is right, we could help him with the down payment. Clara could even contribute her little bonus. It would be a real family project. She could continue living at her apartment, of course, and help with the mortgage. It would be a wonderful investment for her. They weren't just trying to talk me out of it anymore. They were actively trying to take it from me." They stood there in the backyard of the house I had found with the realtor I had hired, planning to buy it for my brother using my money, and expected me to be a smiling, compliant contributor to my own erasure. Sarah, the realtor's face, was a mask of professional neutrality, but I saw the flash of shock in her eyes. She looked from my parents to me, waiting. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It vaporized. The years of quiet resentment, of swallowed frustrations, of feeling second best, all of it combusted into a silent, white-hot rage. The part of me that had always sought their approval, that had bent and twisted itself to keep the peace, died right there in that sunny backyard. I looked at my parents, truly looked at them, and for the first time I didn't see the people who had raised me. I saw two strangers who had built their family on a foundation of my sacrifice. I saw my brother, a grown man who had never outgrown his sense of entitlement. They were so confident, so assured in their power over me, that they had revealed their true nature without a shred of shame. That was their fatal miscalculation. They thought they were closing the door on my dream. Instead, they had just handed me the key to my own liberation. As my family continued their audacious pitch to the Realtor detailing how my dream house would become Leo's art studio, I remained silent. My initial shock and rage cooled, crystallizing into a calm, diamond-hard resolve. They thought they had won. They thought their brazen move had finally crushed my spirit. What they didn't know was that they had just activated a contingency plan. They couldn't possibly have imagined a plan set in motion years ago by the one person in my family who had always been in my corner, my grandmother, Eleanor. My grandmother passed away 5 years ago. She was my father's mother, but in spirit she was entirely my own. She was a formidable woman, a former librarian with a sharp mind and an even sharper wit. She saw through the family dynamics with a clarity that my parents either lacked or chose to ignore. She saw how they babied Leo, how they relied on me, and how they took my quiet nature for weakness. "Don't ever let them mistake your kindness for a lack of strength, Clara," she used to tell me, her hand gripping mine. "The deepest rivers run silent." A week after her funeral, her lawyer, a kind, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Gable, had called me for a private meeting. My parents and Leo had received small sentimental bequests, but the bulk of my grandmother's modest estate was a mystery. In Mrs. Gable's office, she handed me a thick envelope. Inside was a letter in my grandmother's elegant looping script and documents for a trust fund she had established for me years before she died. "My dearest Clara," the letter began, "if you are reading this, I am gone. I have watched you grow into a remarkable, responsible young woman, and I am so incredibly proud of you. I have also watched with no small amount of frustration how your family takes your strength for granted. They see you as their pillar, but they forget that even pillars can crumble under too much weight. I have left you this trust not as a handout, but as a tool. It contains the proceeds from the sale of my home and my life savings, a little over $450,000. There are strict conditions. This money is to be used for one purpose and one purpose only: for you to purchase a home of your own, a place of sanctuary and independence. It cannot be used for anything else, not for cars, not for debts, and most certainly not for bailing out your brother. Mrs. Gable will be the trustee and will ensure these terms are met. Use it to build a life that is truly yours, my love. Put down roots. Be happy. It is the greatest wish of my heart." I had wept reading that letter. For years I had kept the trust a complete secret. It was my ultimate safety net, but I was determined to achieve my dream on my own if I could. I didn't want to rely on it. I wanted to earn it. So I saved, I worked, I planned, treating my grandmother's gift as the final powerful ace up my sleeve to be played only when absolutely necessary. Standing in that backyard listening to my parents plot to steal my dream, I realized that moment had arrived. That afternoon, after the disastrous house viewing, I didn't go home. I went straight to a quiet coffee shop, pulled out my laptop, and booked an urgent appointment with Evelyn Gable for Monday morning. I spent the rest of the weekend in a focused flurry of activity. I called Sarah, my realtor, and explained everything. Her initial shock gave way to steely support. "Okay," she said, her voice, "all business. This is what we're going to do." Together, we hatched a plan. Sarah drew up an official full-price offer for the house on Elm Street, which I signed electronically. She submitted it that evening. On Sunday, the sellers accepted. The house was officially under contract in my name. The next step was the financing. My own savings combined with my bonus were enough for a solid 20% down payment. I applied for a mortgage for the remaining amount, knowing that even if I was approved, I wouldn't need it. The trust was my real financial power. On Monday morning, I walked into Evelyn Gable's office. She listened, her expression impassive, but her eyes flashing with anger as I recounted the events of the weekend. "Eleanor saw this coming," she said, shaking her head. "She knew they would never stop seeing you as a resource to be tapped. She put the conditions on the trust specifically to protect you from this exact scenario." We spent the next 2 hours preparing the counteroffensive. Mrs. Gable initiated the wire transfer from the trust to an escrow account enough to purchase the Elm Street house outright. Then she did something brilliant. She pulled up the real estate listings for the small condominium complex where my parents lived. They had been renting a 2-bedroom unit there for over 15 years. As it happened, a unit identical to theirs 2 floors up had just gone on the market. "Your grandmother's trust was for a home," Mrs. Gable said with a thin smile. She never specified it had to be just one. On my instructions, she prepared a second cash offer well over asking price for that condominium. The final piece of the plan was the stagecraft. I called my parents on Tuesday. My voice was deliberately subdued, almost defeated. "You were right," I said the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. "I can't afford that house on Elm Street. The bank won't approve a loan that big. I give up." The relief in their voices was palpable. "Oh, honey, it's for the best," my mother cooed. "We knew you'd see reason." "I've arranged a meeting with Sarah, the Realtor, on Friday," I continued. "She's going to go over the numbers with me, show me why it's not feasible." I was hoping. "You could come with me, for moral support. Of course we'll be there," my father boomed. "And we have some good news. We talked to Leo and he's thrilled about the house. We're ready to make an offer as soon as you're officially out of the picture." "Great," I said, my voice flat. "The meeting is at her office at 3 p.m. on Friday." I hung up the phone, my heart hammering in my chest. The trap was set. They were walking into it with absolute confidence, blinded by their own arrogance and their lifelong underestimation of me. They were expecting to witness my surrender. They had no idea they were about to attend my coronation. Friday afternoon arrived with a crisp autumn chill in the air. I spent the day in a state of suspended animation, a strange calm settling over my nerves. I chose my outfit with care, a simple, well-tailored, navy blue dress. It was the kind of professional attire my mother always said I should wear more often, a subtle nod to the version of me they thought they knew. But underneath, I felt a current of power I had never experienced before. I arrived at Sarah Jenkins' real estate office 20 minutes early. The conference room was prepared exactly as we had planned. A large screen was on the wall, a stack of folders sat in the center of the polished mahogany table, and a tray with a carafe of water and glasses was set to one side. Mrs. Gable, my grandmother's lawyer, was already there, looking formidable and elegant in a charcoal gray suit. She gave me a firm, reassuring nod. "Ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be," I replied. My family arrived at precisely 3 o'clock. They swept into the office with an air of proprietary ownership, as if they were the ones conducting the meeting. My father clapped my realtor on the shoulder. "Sarah, good to see you again. Ready to talk some sense into our girl here," my mother smiled graciously at Mrs. Gable, assuming she was another agent. "It's so good of you all to help Clara through this. She gets these fanciful ideas." Leo trailed behind them, scrolling on his phone, looking bored but entitled. Sarah directed them to their seats on one side of the table. I sat opposite them with Mrs. Gable to my right. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah began, her voice professionally neutral. "Clara asked me to put together a presentation to clarify her financial position regarding the property on Elm Street." She clicked a remote, and the screen lit up with a picture of the charming Craftsman house. My mother sighed dramatically. "It is a pretty house. Such a shame she can't afford it." "Well, let's look at the numbers," Sarah said, clicking to the next slide. It showed the sale price, closing costs, and property taxes. My father leaned forward, squinting at the figures. See, Clara, we told you. The total amount is just too much for you to handle on your own. It's simply not responsible. You're right, Dad, I said, my voice clear and steady. Every eye in the room turned to me. A mortgage of that size would have been a stretch. That's why I'm not getting one. My father looked confused. What are you talking about? Then you can't buy the house. That's what we've been telling you. Actually, Sarah interjected, clicking to the next slide. The screen now displayed a single document, a copy of a cashier's check for the full purchase price of the house. Clara is a cash buyer. The sale closed this morning. The property on 125 Elm Street is officially hers. The silence that followed was absolute. My parents and brother stared at the screen, their faces a comical tableau of disbelief. My father's jaw was literally hanging open. My mother's perfectly applied smile had frozen and was starting to crack. Leo had finally looked up from his phone. What? How? He stammered. I let the moment hang in the air before speaking. It seems you've always had a very limited understanding of my finances, I said, looking directly at my parents. You saw my sensible car and my small apartment and assumed I was struggling. You never considered that it was a choice, that I was saving, planning, and had resources you knew nothing about. What resources? My mother whispered, her voice barely audible. This was Mrs. Gable's cue. She calmly opened one of the folders in front of her. I can answer that, she said, her voice carrying the full weight of legal authority. I am Evelyn Gable, counsel for the estate of the late Eleanor Vance, Clara's grandmother. My parents flinched at the mention of her name. Eleanor was a very shrewd woman. She established a significant testamentary trust for her granddaughter years ago, a trust with very specific legally binding stipulations. She slid copies of the trust documents across the table. This trust was designated for the sole purpose of purchasing a primary residence for Clara. The funds could not be accessed for any other reason. Eleanor, it seems, wanted to ensure Clara had a foundation for her independence protected from outside claims or pressures. My father snatched the papers, his hands trembling as he read. My mother just stared at me, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. You lied to us, she said. You let us believe you were struggling. No, I corrected her gently. You chose to believe that because it fit your narrative. You never asked me about my life, my career, or my plans. You just assumed. You assumed I was your perpetual safety net. You assumed my successes were your resources. You assumed my dreams were your opportunities. Leo finally found his voice a petulant whine. So you've had this secret money all along and you never helped us out. You let me drive that crappy car while you were sitting on a pile of cash. That pile of cash, Mrs. Gable cut in her tone icy was legally untouchable for any purpose other than the one we have just executed. Any attempt to persuade Clara to use it otherwise would have been considered fraudulent inducement. The final act was delivered by Sarah. She opened a second folder and placed it in the center of the table. Well, now that the ownership of the Elm Street property is settled, she said with a bright professional smile, we have one more piece of business. Clara has also closed on a second investment property today. She pulled out a single document and laid it on top of the folder. It was the deed to Unit 4B at the Oak Haven condominiums. My parents' address. My father looked from the paper to my face, his own face ashen. That's Mrs. Henderson's apartment, 2 floors above us. It was, I said. As of this morning, it's mine. Which means as of today, I'm your new landlord. The room fell into a stunned, deafening silence. The smug confidence, the patronizing arrogance, the lifetime of casual dismissal, it all evaporated in an instant, replaced by raw, unadulterated shock. They had come to witness my defeat. They had stayed to witness my triumph. I stood up my legs, feeling steadier than they ever had before. The leases on both your apartment and Leo's will be honored until they expire, I said. My voice devoid of malice, filled only with a calm finality. After that, we can discuss new terms. Or you can find somewhere else to live. The choice for the first time will be entirely yours. I looked at my family, truly seeing them not as giants who controlled my world, but as small, stunned people who had just discovered the pillar they'd been leaning on their entire lives was walking out the door. Walking out of that conference room was like breaking the surface of the water after holding my breath for a lifetime. The air in the hallway felt lighter, cleaner. I left my family sitting in stunned silence, the deeds to my properties lying between them like unexploded bombs. Mrs. Gable and Sarah followed me out, and once the door was closed, Sarah let out a low whistle. "I have been in this business for 20 years, she said, shaking her head in disbelief, and I have never, ever seen anything like that. That was spectacular. I felt a genuine smile spread across my face, the first in what felt like weeks. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Mrs. Gable placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Your grandmother would be incredibly proud, Clara. You used her gift exactly as she intended, not just to buy a house, but to build a life." I didn't go back to my old apartment that night. I drove straight to Elm Street. The sold sign was already staked in the front yard, a bright red beacon of my victory. I let myself in with my new key, the click of the lock echoing in the empty house. It smelled of old wood and fresh paint. I walked through the rooms, which were no longer filled with the ghosts of my family's criticisms, but with the boundless potential of my future. I stood in the backyard under the big maple tree and finally let myself cry. They weren't tears of anger or sadness, but of profound, cathartic relief. The weight of their expectations, a burden I had carried for so long. I had forgotten what it felt like to be without it, was gone. My phone started buzzing in my purse a few hours later. A barrage of texts and missed calls. First, from my mother, "Clara, you can't be serious. This is a cruel joke. Call me immediately." Then my father, "I demand an explanation. You have gone too far." And finally, "Leo, you, seriously, bought their building. What the fuck is wrong with you?" I read the messages and for the first time felt nothing. No guilt, no anxiety, no need to placate them. I simply turned my phone off. The next few days were a whirlwind of blissful activity. I hired movers, packed up my small apartment, and began the process of making the house my own. Friends I hadn't seen in months came out of the woodwork to help, bringing pizza, paintbrushes, and genuine joy for my new beginning. My friend Sarah was my rock, helping me choose paint colors and plan the garden. "It's like you're a different person," she said as we sat on the porch swing of my new house sipping lemonade. "You stand taller." I knew she was right. I felt taller. About a week after the confrontation, I received a formal typed letter in the mail. It was from my father. It was a stiff, awkwardly worded demand for a family meeting to discuss the future of the properties and our familial relationship. It was clear he was trying to re-establish control to turn this into a negotiation. I wrote a short, simple reply. "My decision is final. The properties are mine. Our relationship can be discussed when you are ready to offer a sincere apology." The immediate aftermath for them was, from what I heard through the grapevine, chaotic. My aunt called me utterly bewildered. "Your mother called me hysterical," she said. "Something about you buying their building, Clara. What on earth is going on?" I gave her the condensed, honest version. To her credit, she was quiet for a long moment and then said, "Well, it's about time someone stood up to them." Without me as their financial and emotional backstop, things began to unravel. Leo, who had been living in a downtown apartment subsidized by both me and my parents, suddenly found his rent was due. He called my parents in a panic, but they for the first time couldn't just write a check. They were facing the prospect of having to pay market-rate rent to their own daughter in a few months. And the reality of their financial situation without my constant contributions was setting in. The peace they had purchased with my money and my compliance had evaporated, leaving only the stark reality of their own choices. For me, it was a time of quiet joy and discovery. I spent hours in my garden, my hands in the dirt, feeling a connection to the earth and to my own strength. I hosted a housewarming party and filled my home with the laughter of true friends. Every morning I woke up to the sunlight streaming through my own windows, a profound sense of peace settling deep in my bones. I had not just bought a house, I had bought my freedom. And while they were just beginning to reckon with the consequences of their actions, I was already planting the seeds of my new life. 1 year to the day after I walked out of that real estate office, I was standing on a brand new stone patio in my backyard, surrounded by a garden that was bursting with life. The climbing roses I had planted were winding their way up a trellis. The lavender was buzzing with bees, and a small vegetable patch was yielding more tomatoes than I knew what to do with. My life, much like my garden, had undergone a radical transformation. It was fuller, brighter, and entirely my own. My landscape architecture business had flourished. Freed from the constant financial and emotional drain of my family, I had poured all my energy into my work. I took risks, pitched ambitious projects, and landed a major contract designing the grounds for a new community arts center. The success was validating, but the true reward was the creative freedom and the knowledge that every dollar I earned was for my own future, my own security. I had built a life that was not just stable but joyful. The fate of my family, on the other hand, had unfolded like a slow, inevitable lesson in consequences. As their landlord, I had been firm but fair. I hired a professional property management company to handle all communication, creating a necessary buffer. When their lease came up for renewal 6 months after my purchase, the management company presented them with a new lease set at the current, non-negotiable market rate. The sticker shock was profound. For the first time in their lives, my parents were forced to confront the true cost of their lifestyle. They could no longer afford their 2-bedroom condo. After weeks of desperate searching, they downsized to a small 1-bedroom apartment in a less desirable suburb, a 30-minute drive from their old neighborhood and friends. The move was a significant blow to their pride and their social standing. My mother, who had always valued appearances, found it difficult to adjust. Their financial reality, stripped of my subsidies, was harsh. Leo's story was even more telling. With my financial support cut off and my parents unable to help, he had been forced to get a real job. His dream of being a celebrated graphic artist had been replaced by the reality of working a 9-to-5 job in the marketing department of a mid-size insurance company. It was stable work, but it was a far cry from the free-spirited, creative life he had always envisioned for himself. He had to give up his expensive downtown apartment and move into a small studio. Without the constant safety net, he was forced to learn the lessons of budgeting and responsibility that I had learned a decade earlier. He was, in essence, finally growing up. My relationship with them had been redefined by stark, clear boundaries. After months of silence, my mother had reached out not with a demand, but with a quiet, tentative invitation for coffee. We met at a neutral cafe. She looked tired, the confident, controlling matriarch replaced by a woman who seemed smaller, more uncertain. She offered a halting, tearful apology. "We were wrong, Clara," she admitted, stirring her latte. "We never saw you. We just saw what you could do for us. For Leo. I'm so sorry. It wasn't a magic fix, but it was a start. Our relationship since then has been one of careful rebuilding. We have monthly dinners, but they are on my terms at my house. The dynamic has irrevocably shifted. I am no longer the compliant daughter. I am an independent woman, and they are for the first time treating me as such. My father has had a harder time. His apology was gruffer, more reluctant, but it came. He respects my boundaries because he has no other choice. The power has shifted, and we are all still adjusting to the new equilibrium. Leo and I have a more distant relationship. He still harbors some resentment, but there's a new grudging respect in his eyes. He once commented during a family dinner, "I don't know how you did it all those years, Clara. This adulting thing is exhausting." It was the closest he'd ever come to acknowledging the weight I had carried for him. The justice in this story wasn't loud or vengeful. It was the quiet, natural unfolding of cause and effect. They had built their world on a faulty foundation, my coerced sacrifice. When I removed that foundation, their world had to be rebuilt on a new, more honest footing. They were learning to live within their means to be responsible for themselves. And I, in my sun-drenched garden, had learned that the most beautiful things grow only after you've cleared away the weeds. The two properties my grandmother's legacy had provided were more than just investments. They were instruments of liberation tools that had allowed me to not only build my own home, but to give my family the opportunity to finally build character. It was a painful, difficult process, but looking back, I wouldn't have changed a thing. I had found my voice, my strength, and my home all by daring to believe in a dream they told me was impossible. Sitting here today, a full year later, on the porch of my very own home, it's strange how time plays tricks on you. The chaos and heartache of that period feel both like a lifetime ago and like a wound that has only just finished healing over. The setting sun casts long shadows across the lawn, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and in the quiet of this evening, I can finally process the full scope of the journey. It was never truly about buying a house. I see that now. The house was simply the battlefield. The real war was an internal one, a quiet, lifelong struggle to dismantle a story that had been written for me before I was old enough to hold the pen. For 32 years, I lived within the pages of that story, the life and times of Clara, the sensible one. It's a seductive role to play, isn't it, being the responsible one? It comes with a kind of low-grade, constant approval. You are praised for your stability, your practicality, your willingness to put others first. It feels safe. It feels like you are earning your place in the family. What you don't realize, what I didn't realize, is that this role is a cage. A comfortable cage, perhaps with gilded bars of familial obligation and praise, but a cage nonetheless. It limits your growth, clips your wings, and quietly convinces you that your own dreams are a form of selfishness. The cost of being the family's pillar is that you forget you are made of flesh and bone, not stone. You forget that you too need support, that you too deserve to build something for yourself. My life was a series of carefully managed budgets, of deferred dreams, of maybe next year's. I was so busy being the safety net for everyone else that I never stopped to build my own foundation. What I came to understand in the stark, humiliating light of that backyard on Elm Street was that the love I was trying so desperately to earn through sacrifice was never really love at all. It was dependence. They didn't love me. They loved my function. They loved that I was predictable. They loved that I was a low-risk, high-return investment for their own comfort and for my brother's endless second chances. The moment I signaled a desire to invest in myself, I wasn't just breaking a rule. I was threatening their entire ecosystem. My dream of a home wasn't a dream to them. It was a defection. The greatest and by far the most difficult lesson I learned was about the true nature of boundaries. Before all this, I thought of boundaries as walls you build to keep people out. I see now that's not what they are. Healthy boundaries are not walls. They are gates. Gates that you control. You decide who to let in, how far you let them in, and when you need to close the gate to protect what's inside. Setting that first definitive boundary in the realtor's office felt like an explosion, but the real work came in the quiet, uncertain weeks that followed. It came in the form of a late-night phone call from my mother a month after the confrontation, her voice thick with tears trying to slip back into the old dynamic. "Leo is having such a hard time at his new job, Clara. He just needs a little help to get his car fixed, just a few $100s. You're doing so well now, it would be nothing for you." And in that moment, I had to find the strength to close the gate, gently but firmly. "Mom, I love you and I love Leo, but my role as the family bank is over. He needs to learn to solve his own problems now." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with disappointment and a lifetime of ingrained expectation. Holding that line, hearing that silence, and not immediately caving to the guilt that was harder than buying the house. That was the real work of building a new life. And with that work came a necessary and painful grieving process. I had to grieve the family I always wished I had. I had to accept the reality that my parents might never fully understand the depth of the hurt they caused, that my brother might never fully appreciate the sacrifices I made. You have to let go of the fantasy that one day they will wake up and become the people you needed them to be. You have to learn to love them for who they are from a safe distance while loving yourself enough to refuse to let their limitations define your life. My grandmother understood this. Her legacy wasn't just the money. That was simply the catalyst. Her true gift was foresight. She saw the woman I was capable of becoming long before I saw it in myself. She didn't just give me a tool, she gave me a blueprint for my own liberation. I often imagine her watching this all unfold, not with surprise, but with a grim sense of satisfaction, knowing that the protections she put in place had worked exactly as intended. She armed me for a battle she knew I would one day have to fight. In the wake of that battle, I discovered the profound truth about what constitutes a home. It is so much more than four walls and a deed in your name. For years, I lived in houses and apartments, but I was never truly home because my own home was a place where I had to constantly manage the emotions and expectations of others. It was a place where I walked on eggshells. My real home, the one I have now, is a feeling. It's the peace of mind that comes from knowing you are safe. It's the freedom to be messy, to be imperfect, to be gloriously unapologetically yourself. It's the quiet joy of planting a garden, of nurturing something, and watching it grow a living metaphor for my own healing. Each weed I pulled felt like I was uprooting an old resentment. Each flower that bloomed felt like a new possibility. The money, the inheritance was the key, but it wasn't the treasure. The treasure was the clarity it afforded me. It didn't change who my family was. It was a powerful light that simply illuminated who they had been all along. And it gave me the freedom to finally see myself clearly, not as a reflection of their needs, but as a person with her own intrinsic worth. The most valuable thing I own isn't this house, or the condo, or my thriving business. It's the unshakable, hard-won knowledge that I am enough all on my own. That is a foundation no one can ever threaten a home, no one can ever take away from me. What is the role that you've been assigned in your life or your family? Are you the sensible one, the peacemaker, the troublemaker? And what would it take for you to begin rewriting your own script? I would be honored to read your stories and insights in the comments below. If this story spoke to you, if it touched a part of you that has felt unseen or undervalued, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing these important stories of resilience and transformation. And please share this video with someone, a friend, a sister, a mother, who might need a reminder that they are the architect of their own life and they have the power to build something beautiful. Thank you for listening. May you find the courage to pick up your own tools, to draw your own blueprints, and to build the life you not only dream of, but deeply and truly deserve.